welcome back for another week. This is your favourite time of the week. I know it is. That's why you're here. Media Matters with Maree Buscke here on RCR Talk. And of course, joining me is my partner in crime, as always, the effervescent, the exciting, the wonderful Marty Gibson. Hi, Marty.
Very kind of you, Maree. How are you doing?
I'm great because I'm in Auckland. Yes, this is my sort of home away from home at the BFFs in Auckland, and I'm hoping the internet behaves while I'm up here because it's rural Auckland, so anything could happen. Yeah, it's good. It's really good. And we just had a very loosey-goosey planning for what we're going to talk about today, but there's some good stuff. And, you know, you called it at the very first show of the year, and you said that you felt that 26 rather, was going to be the year of truth. Yep. Yeah, you're on the money so far, my friend.
Peak bullshit was 2025. There was that American journalist and author, Alan Barth, who said that news is only the first rough draft of history. But as I consume as much media as I can stomach, I'm struck with the banality of it all. The willful ignoring of the most important things. And it occurred to me that when historians look back on the news from this time, they'll likely be most struck with what was not in the news, despite the information being freely available. And the terrible thing is, for about 70% of the population, that's good enough. And that's enough of a proportion of the population to vote in either side of the uni party. And, you know, it's been a lot of last year talking about that. But yeah, we've both sort of gone off piste a little bit, and it's quite jarring, isn't it? You know, yesterday when I was walking the old doggos, I thought, I should, had a look at Hosking and had a look at Heather du Plessis-Allan, and just it's worth me just going through it. I was just looking at the shows, and I was just thinking, a UK correspondent on Sarah Ferguson's companies winding down following latest Epstein release. Oh, that's interesting. That's actually recent, so it's only 4 minutes ago, so that wasn't on there. But when I was looking at it, it was just loose.
No, it's droll. I think is the word you could
droll,
potentially
droll
looking
means
for.
mildly amusing, so it's not droll, dull. But yeah, just trivia. And so I mean, I've been looking at, well, you and I both looked at Marco Rubio's speech to the EU, and it's like you can hear the seismic shift in international relations. Looking at Rupert Lowe, who I'm sure we'll get to, you know, what he's doing, starting the Restore Britain party, seismic. And I'm looking at our politicians, and I'm realizing they're all on the side of Christine Lagarde, you know, and the European Union, which, you know, I saw a guy, and I'll post a link to it, described the European Union as modeled on the Soviet Union. You know, it had a parliament, but it didn't have any power to come up with laws. They were all pre-formed from the Politburo. And Christopher Luxon, Hipkins, they're all on the side of that neo-feudalist, those stinky proletariat. You know, we'll give them the illusion that they have a say, but it's far too important to be left to plebs kind of attitude. And, you know, my visceral disgust with that, I think, is spreading.
Yeah, so on the way up, I often listen to podcasts and things, but I had number one son with me because I was bringing him back to Auckland. So I said to him, "Have you heard Leighton Smith?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, you talk about him." And I said, "Well, because of course his first show for the year had dropped this last week, and it was Shane Jones." So I said to number one, I said, "Well, I'd quite like to listen to this." And he said, "Oh, I'll listen to that." So up we went, and right in the first 5 minutes of the interview, and I mean, let's face it, Shane Jones is such a raconteur that you could listen to him so easily because he's so entertaining anyway. Within the first 5 minutes, he comes out with this absolute stinger. Resource consents and other environmental permits that remain absolutely sluggish, dominated by unelected grandees who have never faced the consequences of their constipated approach to facilitating resource development.
Yeah. I mean,
Truth.
Leighton Smith did an interview, and I haven't got the name of the guy to hand, but he was the man who's leading the iron sand exploration off the Taranaki coast. And this is, of course,
And
what
he was quoted in this interview. And Shane Jones they quoted that chap, and Alan somebody.
Yeah, it's horrifying that the scale of the resource there, the minimal environmental impact relative to getting these things from Africa through child slave labor. And what was interesting was just the weight of Maori veto that had been placed on him. Of course, this is Debbie Ngāre Paca's most proud achievement, is that she's blocked off this industry, mainly because she's got her hand out and she's like, well, we want some of the money. It's not.
But as we said last year, though, because we discussed this last year, I mean, she's saying that, no, Māori want part of this wealth because, we're the custodians of this land. It's like, yeah, because as custodians 200 years ago, you so knew what the wealth were of those iron sands sitting underneath the water. Yeah, nah.
Well, this guy has had to pay 30 different tribal bodies 10,000 each to attend his meetings and block him. It's one of those things where just a lack of vision and the kind of look, if I can't have it all, no one's going to have it kind of sour grapes. I enjoyed that interview with Shane Jones. And I think the thing about Shane Jones that is good to listen to is he does speak from the heart to a large extent. He's not afraid to he doesn't have that same guardedness about saying the wrong thing.
One of the questions that Leighton asked him, because they both knew each other, they were both doing a law paper together in Victoria in 1980. And Leighton said, well, I just arrived in New Zealand, tasked with setting up Talkback Radio in Wellington. You and I were in that class, and Shane remembered Leighton. Leighton admitted he didn't really remember Shane, and he said, well, where were you? Where was 1980 Shane at? And as Shane said, he'd moved to Wellington. He was in his second year. He was married. He was a father. And he said, and in terms of the Māori community, some of the biggest changes that he'd seen, and this is what he was fighting against, was the degradation of the family unit and the abandonment by too many men of their responsibility and the ease of the access to welfare.
Yeah.
Saying the truth out loud.
Well, I said on last week's show, those factors that you could most point to as being responsible for the ill health of Māori society are never talked about. Then it's never talked about that our food pyramid is fraudulent and tells people they've got to eat a loaf of bread's worth of carbohydrates every day. The fatherlessness is it dare not speak its name, but if you look at the stats for most of the Māori men who wind up in jail, a very small proportion of them had a present father, let alone one that was fit for purpose. So it's
and you mentioned Heather du Plessis-Allan before, in terms of things that they were talking about, and this fatherlessness comes to it. She brought up the stat last week, was because it was reiterated that now more women in this country over 40 are having children than women under 25. And you have brought this up on many occasions before. And Heather was like, this is wonderful. I'm one of those women over 40. Of course it's fantastic. It's because we know who we are and this is all really fantastic. It's like, look, Heather, I'm really glad that you're having a wonderful motherhood experience. And man, how precious that is. How precious that is, especially after 40. I mean, I did mine in my mid to late 30s and it was hard enough then. Mr. Maree, he was quite keen for number 3. I think he would have quite liked a wee girl. And I turned around and said, I had this hard and fast rule, no breastfeeding in my 40s. No, child rearing in my 40s was a no-go zone. I was like, I couldn't imagine it. It was hard enough as it was in my 30s. And here's Heather like flippantly saying, it's just wonderful that so many women are waiting till their 40s.
The argument that sometimes women lack lack objectivity. It's like, oh, it's all about me. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, great.
So
I
that was
had
sort
kids
of
later than I should have, in some ways, which is good in some ways. But it was because no one, I mean, I might have said this before. When I was 18, New Zealand's divorce rate peaked. And so I started working in factories to pay my way through university. And I just was encountering all of these traumatized men who were saying, don't get married, boy. Go overseas, screw your brains out. This very nihilistic. And, like it wasn't always, no one was really making having kids look like good fun when I was a kid. But it is. And I sort of say that to my daughter's friends, like you'll be a great mum. And no one else is really saying that to them. With the abortion thing, I can get alongside the safe, rare, and legal thing. I'm not wanting to be unrealistically extreme about it, but I am thoroughly convicted that our sex education needs to have as one of its aims to greatly reduce the abortion numbers in New Zealand. And if you talk to Penny Maree, it does the opposite. It frames having an abortion as a virtuous
birth
political
control.
act. Yeah,
it's birth control. Yeah, it's insanity. And just looking at because we are going to get onto some of the truth with our politicians. Debbie Ngāti-Wapaka, here you have Shane Jones saying things like, absolute truth bombs, drop the mic stuff. Meanwhile, Debbie, oh yes, we need to have a piece of those iron sands under the water because historically they're ours. Turning around, celebrating the murder and the death of Captain Cook, which happened to be on Valentine's Day, putting up this image, putting out this post, calling him the colonizer. Yeah, well, obviously you didn't pass history, Debbie, because he wasn't a colonizer. He was an explorer last time I checked, but what do I know?
Doesn't matter, does it?
Doesn't matter. It's just like, really? You're supposed to be one of our political leaders and this is what you put out?
I tell you what, that kind of bullshit will only survive as long as the universal acceptance of white folks does. You can have rampant, threatening violence, Maori ethno-nationalism, but it requires something to parasitize, and that is white people who are still acting as if we're all one nation. Once, and this is the year for it. I think the fear of being called racist has gone the same way as the fear of being called a bigot did in around 2019. I think the willingness that people have just to go, you know what, that's disgusting. I mean, if you know anything about Captain Cook and you think, imagine taking to the oceans where you're making maps and you could sail into a rock and sink and be screwed at any moment. Celebrating the death of someone like that, who was, when you look at him, was a really, particularly for his time, a tremendously humane person.
And look, we're both from Gisborne, and there is a checkered history there as well. I mean, obviously there was the shooting, hence the reason for the name of Poverty Bay, and sailing around the coast to the Bay of Plenty and all of that. But, if you hadn't had the exploration from James Cook and then the English that came over, your other options were the Dutch, the French. Who else was sniffing around at that time? They reckon the Portuguese came through and having an early look. I mean, the reality of it is European colonization was an inevitability. It was going to happen. So, I think
that's the tale of human history, isn't it? People get conquered, and all of the parts of New Zealand that were colonized, often. I mean, before they called Golden Bay, it was Murderers Bay because of the French vessel that docked there and got murdered by the tribe there, and some French went back seeking Utu, but the problem was the people who had murdered them had been murdered themselves. that A.W. Reid Hooton Kawa sanitized view of pre-European Maori history. It's it's part of that postmodernist disdain for the truth. The ends justify the means, and so if lying is what's required, then you lie.
Well, you just go back to what you said at the beginning of the show, willfully ignoring the most important things. I wrote that down because I thought that was very good, Martin. Right. Cotterill. Speaking of willfully ignoring some of the most important things, I read this when it came out, and I flicked it in our little group text because I mean, as we know, it's no secret that we like the Bruce here, and we quote him often. He had his first piece for the new year, and the headline is Christopher Luxon versus Chris Hipkins, what voters should expect from a Prime Minister, which on election year is a perfectly reasonable excuse or reasonable topic. Talked about where the Prime Minister is at, and he's been looking at the polling, and I have to admit, you and I have said this several times around the polling. I mean, where people's heads are at just amazes me. 11% on the last one I saw for the Greens, that 10% crazy quotient that we talk about is still very alive and well. However, there was an admission at the latest, I think, with One News Variant, that Winston Peters has doubled his support since the last election. And it's almost like that they've just suddenly realised this. But anyhow, Cotterill, the favoured Prime Minister question is one that I've always considered unusual. The question does not appear alongside any definition of what we actually want in a Prime Minister. And let's be clear, none of them have been perfect. In reviewing every Prime Minister of the last 40 years, each one has been very different. They all had strengths and weaknesses. Most, but not all, have at least been competent. And at the most basic level of electorate expectations, people like David Lange, Jim Bolger, Helen Clark, John Key and Bill English have served us well. For my money, the current Prime Minister, who, like others listed above, are not perfect, is nevertheless on his way to falling into the category of at least done a reasonable job. I think Cotterill has been generous. However, what I always love about Cotterill is he does provide solutions of what he believes should happen. First and foremost, I would expect competence, not competence in media interviews, which have become so important in forming opinions but demonstrate little about capability, but competence in the executive skills to lead a multidisciplined organisation in a highly complex environment. Competence, Marty, let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Cotterill, is a manager, and he speaks from the management class of people. And yep, I really enjoy the input of him, Prebble, Hooton, those sort of sensible right wing commentators who are good with data. My criticism of all of them, Don Brash, is the same. They don't factor in evil. They don't factor in that dark part of the human heart that I see in Chris Hipkins beneath this effeminate, he wouldn't hurt a fly, little beady-eyed kind of way of being, where people think, well, at least he won't hurt me. He's just a little ginger guy. But inside that guy is a burning mass of resentment, of having his head flushed down the toilet and being bullied at school for his bad skin, and this burning, blistering resentment of people who he perceived as luckier than him, and this urge as a result of that to put his finger on the scales and tilt them. And once you go even further beyond that, the urge just to destroy everything. Karl Marx's favorite quote, "Everything that exists deserves to perish," which comes from Goethe's Faust, which he has the Mephistopheles say. These guys aren't quite there with understanding that evil itself is a pure political force.
Yeah, well, he's sort of taken a slight stab at it.
He's getting there. He'll get there.
He
Once
will.
you start following that thread, that's where you end up.
Well, this is the passage that completely blew me away. I was intrigued to see a headline earlier this week suggesting that Labour leader Hipkins had gone toe-to-toe with Finance Minister Willis over who broke the economy. It seems the former Prime Minister had challenged the government on their failure to manage the economy and more particularly deliver the recovery. You might wonder why a recovery was necessary. My belief is it's necessary because of the damage done by the previous government, a government in which the aforementioned Hipkins was a very senior cabinet minister and ultimately, briefly, Prime Minister, willfully ignoring the most important things. So many Labour voters do that. Anyway, I continue. I've often thought that most politicians are like layers of Kevlar, lightweight but thick-skinned. In this case, I'd add short on memory for completeness. It so seems that Kevlar Hipkins has forgotten the mess that he and his colleagues left behind. With his background as Minister and Prime Minister, he must be in total denial to even line up for the argument with the Finance Minister. This is the person who acted variously as the Minister of Police, Minister of Education and Health during the last Labour government, a period that saw increased youth crime, worsening school attendance and a health service that dithered with organisational restructuring, abolishing the DHB, establishing a Marty health authority in the aftermath of a pandemic, and let's not even go down a little pathway for Mr. COVID-19, all whilst waiting lists lengthened. And let us remember he was the Minister for COVID-19 response, which, in my view, was an appalling abuse of political power from November 2020 until June 22.
Mm-hmm. You can read this whole thing. It is it is good. Let us not forget that the government of which Hipkins was a senior and critical member added almost $100 billion of gross debt to our country's balance sheet, according to the Treasury, with nothing to show for it. That's what galls me. You could take even $1 billion and you could fix a lot of stuff. If you spent $1 billion on getting fewer pregnancies to men who shouldn't, by any objective measure, be fathers. It's a sort of a long-term thing. They gave money away so freely that it's difficult to understand where it went. They gave $1.9 billion to mental health, but outcomes remain contested. Oversight reports show most funding was spent or committed, but the impact, especially for specialist care, remains debated. And he just goes on to describe other ways they just pissed up billions of borrowed dollars against the wall.
Well, and actually, yeah, and if you wanted to go into that in more detail, Thomas Coughlan goes on about the Infrastructure Commission report. He has two very lengthy pieces in the Herald this last few days. And in one of them, he goes through the timeline in terms of roading infrastructure between the Coalition, Labour, Greens, New Zealand First Government, then the Labour on their own, and then now National. Now, there were roads that were set, 4-lane highways, and I just know this because one of those is now the Hawke's Bay Road of Significance, which was in our area. It was all set to go. They'd even started doing some of the prep work. Everything was there. Then the Labour Green Coalition wanted to go down a safety pathway. So instead of putting in this 4-lane highway, which is what we desperately needed, they then put that cheese cutter, those cheese cutter wires that we see everywhere, and that person, whoever holds the contract to fix those bollards every time a car bangs into them, they have done exceptionally well. Now, those roads, many of those roads were costed in 2016, 2017, are now costing, if they were to be built or constructed today, more than 3 times. 3 times. So what was for argument's sake, a $500-600 million project is now blowing out well into the billions. The one thing Coughlan did not address in any of it is why is it costing so much more in what is really a short space of time? That was not addressed once. He's talked about how they should have happened and they've dilly-dallied around, and the original plan was being costed out using road tolls, road user charges and fuel taxes. Then the government goes to just using capital, and then what we have now. But again, why is it costing 3 times more? You've worked on roads, Marty. You understand this. Tell me, explain it to me.
Well, if you shut down Marsden Point, you have to import tar.
Ding, ding,
ding. If you make things so over-regulated for safety that increases blows out the cost of traffic management. If you weaken your currency, all the machinery costs more because your economy is deteriorating. The thing, again, this is factoring in the evil. It suits someone just fine that this is the case. And you go back to Cotterill for a second, talking about these parties who have not refreshed as a result of their 2023 losses. They are by and large the same people who were at the helm in the 2023 election. And he says of them, they do not appear to be interested in making life better for the majority. Instead, they seem to prefer spending our taxes on the international alliances and recognition that might come their way as they support the anti-Israel faction, open borders, diversity, curbed freedoms, and supposed climate chaos, issues that have overburdened Europe and that are celebrated by the so-called global elite, one of whom was once their leader. I'm not sure who he's talking about there, but it could have been either of them. Both Ardern and Hipkins, WEF young global leaders.
Oh, I think he's referring to Ardern now being part of the global elite.
I mean, Luxon aspires to that as well. They're just two wings of the same bird. Luxon, I've said this before, it strikes me that his primary driver is what sort of job he can get when he's got world leader on his CV. And so he doesn't want to quit because he's thinking about his CV. He's thinking about being able to put wins on his CV. And so he's not leaving until he's got those wins, because it makes the whole point of becoming a global leader
worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I was really refreshed to see this from Cotterill coming out swinging for the fences right at the beginning of the year. I mean, this election campaign is going to be absolutely fascinating, and we all have to be, really prepared, because this is where we need to look at what are going to be the issues that we're voting on. I mean, here we are. I mean, what are we now? We're recording this on the 18th. Very soon we will have the Royal Commission of Inquiry, phase 2 for the COVID inquiry. Now, we're going to be talking about that, obviously, on the station quite a bit more between now and then. But here's the deal. While two of the key perpetrators of the crimes, and I'm going to call them crimes, the crimes, or how did Cotterill phrase it? He was vastly nicer. And the appalling abuse of political power are still sitting in the House on the opposition benches, looking at you, Chris Hipkins, looking at you, Aisha Verrill. You're still there. While they're still there, I think that they will couch that report and nobody is going to be happy. I've said that all along. I think everyone is going to be
65% of the population, that's good enough. And that's the real sticking point. But as I've said before, if you're one of the 10% of people who's capable of independent thought in the face of apparently everyone else thinking a bit differently, you've got a duty. You can't look at those 60% of people, because in a village, you do need some people who are just focused on catching fish and they're going like, well, what do I have to do to fit in with the rest of the stuff? That's the way humans are. The race for equality and the elevation of the pursuit of equality to a religious pursuit has blinded us to the fact that we're very different, and that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I found a quote from Thomas Sowell, which there are three questions that I think would destroy most of the arguments on the left. The first is, compared to what? The second is, at what cost? And the third is, what hard evidence do you have? Now, if you think about COVID, yeah, if the media had have asked those questions and factored them, well, I mean, at what cost are we taking children out of school for interrupting their education for 2 years or so?
Yeah. One of the interviews I saw with Thomas Sowell, which years ago, with Tony Robinson and Hoover Institute. Anyway, he was talking to him, and he said, as a young man, you used to consider yourself a Marxist as a young economist, and you were quite outspoken on this, but you now no longer are. What led you to no longer follow Marxism? And he just went, because it doesn't work. So Sal, this doesn't work. Anyway,
it works if you if you're just overflowing with resentment and you want an excuse for other people being better than you, and I say that as someone who's very comfortable with other people being better and richer than me.
Right,
I'd rather have my problems.
I want to jump overseas now because there's been a lot going on internationally. So, in true media matters fashion, we're going to bounce. We're going to bounce overseas. And I've listened twice to the 20-minute speech from Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference. And last year, JD Vance did a complete stinger. It was quite a rebuke to Europe. Rubio's was more measured, more statesman-like. Several absolute zinging quotes, but this was the one that really stood out for me. We want allies who are proud of their culture and their heritage. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalise the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline.
How refreshing is it to hear that?
Yeah. If you've not heard his speech, it's a must. It's a beautiful passage of oratory for starters. And I think he's so calmly, humanely essentially said, hey, Europe, we love you. We want to work with you. We know how wonderful you can be, but get your heads out of your freaking asses.
Well, because we're not going to dictated to by the Politburo that our leaders are so anxious to join the ranks of. I've been watching. I don't know if you want to say something else about Marco Rubio because that's just how we roll. But I was really interested in what's been happening with Rupert Lowe and the launch of the Restore Britain Party. Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. And he posted, this is an interesting insight into the rupture with Farage. Rupert Lowe posted, Farage has just made an important admission. He said it when I started talking about mass deportations, that it was the moment he realized he had to get rid of me. And he did it so in a bit of a stinky way too. What did I actually say that Farage felt he had to get rid of me over? The following position. Please read and let me know who you agree with. I stated that if communities of foreign nationals knew their husbands, cousins, or brothers were industrially raping vulnerable white girls and did nothing, then yes, they should all be deported. Dual nationals involved in the rape, then yes, they go too. We must revoke their citizenship and remove them from our country. As we have seen in our inquiry, this was happening all over towns. Thousands of foreigners knew about the rapes and thousands were involved. Yes, I would deport them all. I would actually give the death penalty to many too, to be entirely honest. This is vile, vile evil. There we go. There's the looking at evil as a political force. Please listen to me when I say this. Do not underestimate the extent of that evil. It goes on and on and on. So if a Pakistani woman knew her foreign husband was gang raping a 12-year-old in the basement and didn't tell the police, then yes, she is complicit and she should be sent back to Pakistan. The husband might not be so lucky. I have now heard the personal story from those 12-year-olds, dozens of them. I'm beyond furious at what these women have been through. Anyone who knew must feel the full brutal force of the law. I make no apologies for that whatsoever.
And then you look at what is trying to happen in some of these cities in the United Kingdom is that you've got factions and neighbourhoods that are operating under Sharia law, forgetting which country in which they live.
It's never going to get easier to prevent a dystopian hell. It's heading that way. People always sort of think, oh, well, we're still the majority. When you get to about 15% of a population, that's when the jihad really kicks off and you lose I have my religion, you have your religion, which is actually abrogated in the Quran. So, they'll quote that, but it's abrogated by later verses, which are slay them all.
Yeah, and I think Britons just need to look at one of their neighbours, of which many Britons emigrated to a long time ago, which is South Africa, and the decline in South Africa in our lifetimes. And let's face it, both you and I know South Africans who have fled South Africa. There was a big migration through the 90s, but there's also been a further migration of South Africans in the 2000s. And South Africa now is a hollow shell of the nation that it once was.
Were you going to say shithole?
Yeah, it was tip of my tongue. And I've got good friends, that go back there recently. And one of my son's best friends was there for Christmas. And he was just saying, your movement is, gravely restricted. I actually saw on X a really great video, and it was showing streets and areas within a variety. Yeah. Very. Have you seen it? Popular, how things were in something like 1990 or 1995 versus how it is today, and it's heartbreaking because it is
what happens when you have when you have people with an average IQ of 70 and the average IQ of a university graduate's 80. No one wants to talk about that. Same with Indian villages, because as I said last show, there's vast difference in the people of India. And, if you get the doctors and, they're great. But if you get the villages and the outdoor defecation, it's, you become the third world.
Yeah. Going back to Rupert Lowe. I mean, he did a launch video, which was filmed on his farm. And one of the things that he said in that statement that really struck with me is that he wants to build a party. I mean, this is a long-term plan for him. He wants to build a party that isn't made of politicians left over from other parties, but actually of farmers, of citizens, of everyday people that represent Britain. And I think he struck a chord for a great number of Britons.
Well, there's the illusion with Lucius Quinticus Cincinnatus, the Roman statesman who's the exemplar of that, the anti-career politician. It was ploughing his fields, sounds like naked, because he had 4 acres of land. They came and got him and said, "Hey, Rome needs you." So he left his plough, went and fixed it, defeated the rebellion, went back to his farm. That's the idea. Because there's always a trap. If you're really good at oratory, the danger is that most of your processing power goes on what you're saying rather than the substance of it. And you see that with some pastors or preachers. They're really good at emoting and all of that. That they kind of, they don't quite have the processing power to be telling the truth. As the same with politicians. That's why I said Shane Jones is, does resonate, because he does say what he thinks. He's still self-aware, but he's got a pretty good verbal IQ.
Well, and he does. And again, like Lowe, one of the things I know Rupert Lowe was looking at was this entire net zero agenda. And I think it was it Constance Kisson in Question Time in the UK recently, that topic came up. And one of the questions asked was, well, what are Britain's emissions? And I think this was to the leader of the Green Party in the UK. What were Britain's emissions, man-made emissions, to this CO2, and theirs was something like 1.2%. I think ours is 0.08.
Something
Fleef out in a hurricane material.
I mean, Luxon's still been, we're absolutely fixated on zero, and we're going to get there. We might even get there a few years early, because all we need, we've invested $70 billion in reducing methane. That's where most of our profile comes from. So we only need one of those to come off, and we'll get there. And there's treaties we signed up to where, if we do have a major breakthrough in technology to do that, and it's hammering a Ferrari engine with a monkey wrench, because you're dealing with these complex cycles and ruminants that have evolved, to be amazingly in tune, or it just doesn't make any sense. It's not a problem.
I mean, is Lowe really a symptom of that wider truth and change in the UK? I mean, you can see that with the reform numbers that they've had, but you also could see that reform was starting to be sucked into the vortex of conformity and where everyone else was going. But that is a signal, isn't it, that the United Kingdom aren't happy. Starmer, meanwhile, let's move over to our little friend Keir. He's literally hanging on by his little fingernails to the leadership of the Labour Party as a coup is brewing because of his taint from the Mendelssohn fallout, which of course goes back to the Epstein files.
I don't get it. He makes my skin crawl. Hipkins makes my skin crawl. Ardern makes I find it very difficult to understand. I have to guess. Why? How do people take them seriously as someone who should be running a country? Aside from, well, they seem so weak and pathetic, they surely can't hurt me. I mean, that's I don't know.
I think it's all those people that go, oh, he's got nice hair. Yeah. So honestly, it's probably as shallow as that. So he's hanging on by his fingernails. But let's take a look at the Epstein stuff, because I mean we loosely mentioned it a few weeks ago, but there have been now a little coterie of high-profile resignations and fallings from grace. Mendelssohn being one, obviously. Andrew Mountbatten Wisner, the former Prince, another, or Duke, whatever, Prince, another. Sarah Ferguson's now been caught on the side of that. Looking at, and I mentioned it to you, that whole Pizzagate type thing. It does look like that what was Pizzagate was actually the entire evil, nasty sickness that was this pedophilic ring that Epstein had. And
it's more than that.
But what I'd love to know, Marty, is that how is that influence? Because I mean, this is a guy, from what I can understand, couldn't rub two brass farthings together, who all of a sudden become this multi-billionaire. I mean, obviously, the peddling of trade secrets, whether they be corporate or treasonous, was quite lucrative for him. Am I missing the mark there or not?
Well, I mean, Tucker Carlson described Epstein as the most plugged-in person he's ever seen. So plugged in that he was discussing the fall of Gaddafi in Libya before it happened and trying to figure out how to profit from that.
Right.
So Tucker Carlson said in this interview, the big question is not, was there blackmail? Yes. Was there sex with minors? Of course. Was there some weird kind of religious practice that we would describe as witchcraft? Oh, yeah. But the bigger question is, what was this? It's clearly an informal governance body over what the rest of us consider authorities, governments, nation states. And that's the whole horrible truth, that the sheep in the sheep pens can't, the freezing works that the sheep in the sheep pens can't even bear to think about. The scale of it. I mean, I really limit how much I watch about that stuff. I don't want to pollute myself too much with what they do to children, but it's evil. And
and you even saw the emails between him and Gates, where they saw the opportunity. They openly discussed how they could profit from that opportunity, which then led in one form or another across, obviously, that filthy little cabal, the greatest wealth transfer in human history during the pandemic.
I mean,
it's staggering, really. I'm amazed Ghislaine Maxwell, they haven't gotten to her. I mean, hasn't she finally given some evidence? I'm a bit like you. I have to keep a bit of a over there with the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you are looking at it as it's presented to us in the media, they'll get to her. If you understand what's really happening, they'll kill her. They've got no compunction about murdering people. It's what they do. And, I don't want to kind of keep, because I've so recently started going to church, I've got a very sharp memory of how jarring it is when people talk to you about about God, but it does. I mean, it makes everything make more sense. I came across a quote from this guy called Seth Gruber, which is interesting. He said, even the slogans of the secular left, justice, equality, human rights, are cut flowers from Christian soil. They survive for a time, beautiful in form, but severed from their roots. Appropriately, Os Guinness calls Western civilization a cut flower civilization. You can enjoy its beauty for a while, but cut flowers die. The only way to keep them alive is to replant them in the soil of faith, no small job description. We, the inheritors of Christendom, still breathe the fragrance of a garden planted 2,000 years ago. Our laws, liberties, even our language of compassion, all of it blooms from the gospel of Jesus Christ. But when we remove the root, when we deny Christ's dominion, the petals fall one by one. And, you know, I can understand the Jeffrey Epstein thing better when I understand, well, he worships Baal. He's making child sacrifices to Moloch. That's not me saying that. He had files called Baal and Moloch. That's what they do. And and it was their understanding that they really believe in that stuff that got me converging on Christianity and eventually taking that leap of faith that gets you there. That, we are facing evil.
We are, and I'm in the middle of doing a series of interviews at the moment, I think the first of which will actually be out now, with parents who are caught up in New Zealand's own version of this via Oranga Tamariki. And some of the conversations I've had, Marty, like I had 2 yesterday, off the record conversations that, honestly, I mean, I'm going to, just not wanting to cry at some of the things that I've heard. And it's happening in this country, under our watch, under the supervision of those paid by us, the taxpayer, to protect our most vulnerable. And it makes me sick.
Yeah.
It makes me sick.
They again, you can see them by their fruit. They hate God, and the best way they feel to poke God in the eye is to hurt children. And you can sort of do all it's just a sexual prep. There's far more to it than that. It doesn't bear examination of what goes on. And as I said, for me, the Zipper consensus starts with, okay, let's do right by children as a society, because a society that doesn't is dying.
Yeah, it doesn't. You're so right. And one of the things that the Epstein files has brought out, what I've seen in Oranga Tamariki has brought out, is that with so many of these people, children have been turned into a commodity which you can make money upon. Yep. And the minute that you actually degrade these precious beings into cattle, essentially, into a commodity, into a product, you just take away all their agency and all their grace. And it is just disgusting. And it's happening at the levels of Epstein. It's happening here. And
as I said, there's that horrible thing I heard someone say. I could never remember which is a shame. But if you want to understand the deep state, picture a network of blackmailed pedophiles. If there are billions of dollars at stake, and you have the ability to affect who becomes in charge of it, you don't want someone who's going to have a sudden rush of conscience and do the right thing by the country. You want a DVD that you can go, And if you read the testimony of people who were abused in care, so many of them talk about being abused by well-dressed people. There's there's a reckoning that's coming.
And it goes back to what you just said at the beginning of the show, willfully ignoring the most important things. Too much of that goes on. Now, you also covered a couple of other things that I didn't. Do you want any comments to make on those before we head off?
I caught Matthew Hooton's article, Luxon has done a poor job of selling the $1 billion LNG terminal in India trade deal. And he asked the question, which I think is very valid: are there any genuine low-tax, free market right-wingers left in Parliament, or have they all been captured by Wellington bureaucrats and lobbyists for vested interests? And sort of talking about how the LNG plant is, after a few weeks of worried national debate from which the government could have learned something, Luxon could have suggested a new LNG plant, hopefully paid for by offshore investors. After a few weeks of debate, he could have announced that, alas, the plant would never make a profit, so would sadly have to be paid for by a temporary levy. But that approach wouldn't sit comfortably with Luxon's apparent need to appear on top of everything, every time, and always to declare his own performance sensational. So, it's just more of that. I mean, if we're really serious about net zero, we can't be serious about net zero and dismissive of nuclear at the same time, because you can make $1 billion mini nuclear power plant for about $1 billion. We'd need 40 of them to look after all of New Zealand's power needs. So for a fraction of that, given that we've got hydro, we could sort that problem if we really see it as a problem. Importing energy from overseas when we have our own energy is just more muddle-headed nonsense.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of that goes on. Well, we've got lots of really great stuff to come, obviously, and I just want to do it this week. Webinars. Woo-hoo-hoo. I'm looking after webinars now for RCR. I'm really excited about this. And we've always done a ton of webinars. Marty and I love doing the backstage passes. There's also our Wednesday webinar series that starts from next Wednesday. And Marty, my first webinar for Wednesday webinars is going to be Council Watch with the fantastic, the wonderful, the awesome Catherine Ennis-Carter.
Ooh. And how many people do you have on them?
Well, I don't know, because we were just about to start them. So we've got.
You should have Rodney on as well. That one.
Oh, I have a whole plan mapped out. It is Ginger and I. Ginger and I have been working on this now for several weeks. So we're going to start a special Wednesday webinar series. So keep an eye out. Keep an eye out to your inboxes with your RCR emails. You'll see details on those. They'll be 8:00 every Wednesday. How you can actually sign up. As I said, the first one's going to be Council Watch with Catherine, and we're just going to do a bit of a rundown of local government, what happened since the local body elections, what we can expect to see, and they are really going to be a series of webinars that help us really truly understand local governance, the importance of local governance, where that fits into national governance, particularly in an election year and the like. So we'll do those the last Wednesday of every month. We also will have a politics webinar Wednesday. We've got a hot topics webinar Wednesday. They'll sort of roll through. And I'm missing one. What's the one I'm missing? Hot topics. Council Watch. Oh, lifestyle. And the first one, I think, of those is going to be with Rodney and Wally in terms of the autumn planting to get in for winter. So lots of different topics, just to make sure, if you aren't already signed up to get the RCR emails, that you do. You can do that on the app or the website at rcr.media, and you can engage in those webinars every Wednesday. And our first, if you're a Foundation Club member, March 1st is the next backstage pass, and it's going to be an absolute thumper. We've got something very special happening with that one. We've got a special COVID inquiry part 2 panel that we're going to have, something different for Backstage Pass this week. So if you are a Foundation Club member, look out for your email for that closer to the time to get registered. So that's my little plug for Wednesday webinar. Yeah, I know. It's very exciting. 2057 for the text and inbox at rcr.media for the email. Any other final thoughts before we jet off for the week, Marty?
Oh, not really. Just carrying on. I mean, I still think in terms of shows, and I, would like to hear what people think about this. I still think that we have a duty of care at RCR to provide some content for teenagers. I think that we should do maybe a topics-based show going over some of the things that they're taught to accept as airily accept as just fact that just ain't so. As Mark Twain said, it's not what people don't know that gets them into trouble. It's what they know for sure that just ain't so.
Well, that could be one of our lifestyle webinars too, couldn't it, teens?
There you go. Make a note, Buscke.
I am making a note.
See what the national radio would have as a meeting. You can see live. You can actually see the sausages being made.
And you just know how I roll. I'm sort of like, oh, light bulb, let's go. That's how the Buscadero rolls. But, that's me. Hey, look, thank you very much. If you're still with us after an hour, we do appreciate it. And again, you can listen to all of our previous shows over at rcr.media and some of the really good content. Man, Paul has been churning out some great stuff this week, and go and check all of that out. Like, there has been some really, really good things. We appreciate you. We appreciate you all the time, and I appreciate you too, Marty, and we'll do this
all thanks,
again next
I
week.
appreciate you too. And now my chickens are hopefully going to appreciate this cockroach that I'm going to catch and feed to them.
There you go. All right, on that note, we'll see you again. Take care.
Have a great week, everybody.